Assalamu alaikum, students. I hope all of you are fine and doing good. So, our today's lecture is about how to write the concluding paragraph or how to write the conclusion in CSS English essay. Now, just to give you a brief overview, before this lecture, we discussed that an essay has effectively uh, a, a structure, a formal structure, and it consists of number one, an introductory paragraph, number two, the body of the essay, and which includes at least 15 body paragraphs, and lastly the concluding paragraph or the conclusion. So effectively an essay has three parts, and we have discussed the two parts in the earlier lectures, and we know that writing an introduction is different from writing body paragraphs. Writing an introduction can be called more of an art, and we discussed it in the previous lecture. And today we are going to discuss about the anatomy, so to speak, or the structure of the concluding paragraph. Because remember, concluding paragraph, writing a concluding paragraph is different from writing an introductory paragraph or writing a body paragraph. It has a different approach to it. Okay, so today we are going to learn how to structure your concluding paragraph, how to write it in a way that you know casts a lasting impression on the examiner about your final thoughts. So without further ado, let's move forward. So this is what we have already discussed in previous lectures, that the structure of an essay in CSS has three main parts. Okay, number one, sorry, yes. So number one, there is an introductory paragraph, as I have told you. Number two, there is the body of the essay, which consists of at least 15 paragraphs. Okay, because even though there is no hard and fast rule that how many paragraphs you should be writing, but if you don't write at least 15 paragraphs, then it means that you haven't generated enough ideas about the topic, and you, or even if you have generated, you weren't able to put them in writing. So that is why I say that at least 15 paragraphs need to be there, because at the end of the day, the purpose of an essay is to convey to the examiner that you can elaborate on a topic if it is given to you. As a CSP officer, you will be given various reports and all those stuff. So that is what the essay paper is preparing you for. So at least 15 paragraphs need to be written. And lastly, the conclusion, which is our today's topic. Okay, we'll be discussing the concluding paragraph in detail, that how it is written. I will be sharing sample concluding paragraphs as well. So this is important. The conclusion is, of course, the final paragraph of an essay. It has three purposes. So it's not just like another body paragraph. The concluding paragraph has different purpose, and it has three purposes. Number one, it signals the end of the essay to the examiner. And the examiner, by reading the concluding paragraph, if without having to turn the next page, he should, you know at the back of his mind, he should know that this essay is coming to an end. And how do we signal to the examiner that our essay is coming to an end? We using the terminology of an essay basically changes. Okay, how we phrase the sentences, it changes. So it signals to the examiner that our essay is coming to an end. Okay, so this is one of the purposes. Second, it reminds the reader of the main points of your essay, and it does so in one of two ways. Okay, you can use either of the two ways. You can either summarize your subtopics or your main points. Okay, of course you can't just main points. You can't just summarize all of the points which you have written in your outline and in your body paragraphs in one paragraph at the end. And believe me, that would, even if you go by that approach, that would make it redundant. Okay, that would make it repetitive. So all you need to do in this first approach is summarize the main points, main topics, main ideas of your essay in the concluding paragraph. Or you can also Paraphrase your thesis statement. Now, I discussed what is thesis statement in the previous lecture in detail. So these are the two ways in which you can remind the examiner that this is your concluding paragraph, that your essay is coming to an end. Either you can summarize your main points or subtopics, or you can paraphrase your thesis statement. Lastly, the last purpose of the essay is to leave the examiner with your final thoughts on the topic. You know, your thesis statement is was in the introductory paragraph. You write the thesis statement at the end of your introductory paragraph. Suppose this was your introductory paragraph. Now at the end, this was your thesis statement. Okay, so that thesis statement was giving the examiner the clue as to what are your thoughts on a particular paragraph. Okay, let's suppose I take the example of, is democracy no more vulnerable in Pakistan? I use the same example again and again in my lectures so that it becomes easier for you to follow, because the main object is to uh, follow or to grasp the concepts. Okay, so if you are familiar with the topic, then it becomes easier for you to grasp the concept. So in that topic, is democracy no more vulnerable in Pakistan, your thesis statement would be providing the examiner with your thoughts, okay, on the topic. Either you would believe, okay, either you would take the stance that yes, democracy is still vulnerable in Pakistan, or you would be opposing it, that no, democracy is no more vulnerable in Pakistan. Now you have taken that stance in your thesis statement. Now in your concluding paragraph, that stance or your thought process or your thoughts on a particular topic should be reiterated. Okay, the examiner should once again be reminded about the final thoughts, okay, on your topics, that what views you have. Of course, you have written that view in the thesis statement, and you have gone on to defend that, to basically strengthen that thesis statement, the stance which you have taken. But once again, in the concluding paragraph, you leave the examiner with your final thoughts on the topic, so that the examiner can know that this student has clarity of mind as to what to write. This student knows that if he is going to pick up a stance, he knows how to defend his stance throughout the essay. So that is the purpose of reiterating your stance at the end of your essay in the concluding paragraph. Moving on. So the anatomy of the conclusion. For some further details, the conclusion begins with a restatement of the thesis, as I just mentioned earlier, not a repetition. This is very important, okay? You should never ever be repeating sentences in your essay, okay? Any sentence should never be repeated in your essay. Now, even if the examiner gets a sniff that this sentence has already been written somewhere in the essay, no, he would consider that, okay, this student is running out of vocabulary or ideas or some other reason that he's repeating the sentences. So even if you are restating the thesis statement, it shouldn't be a repetition. It should be you know in some different wording. The phraseology of your thesis statement should be different as to what was written in your thesis statement. Okay, so it should be different, the wording should be different. And gradually, the conclusion widens towards a final broad statement of implication. As I told you, that the introductory paragraph starts off generally and it narrows down to the thesis statement. Now your conclusion starts with the thesis statement and ends towards a broad final statement of implication. Okay. Now I will give you examples that what does this mean. That the introductory paragraph should be inward pyramid in structure, and your concluding paragraph should be typical pyramid in structure or typical rectangle, so to speak. Okay, so don't get confused if you're not getting it 100%, because I will be discussing this in with examples in later on. Okay, in this same lecture. So the concluding paragraph borrows from the body paragraphs without being flatly repetitive or listing points already covered. So you shouldn't be listing the points, okay? You should be borrowing the ideas from your body paragraphs just to once again reiterate to the examiner as to what were your thoughts on this particular essay, okay? You shouldn't be listing the points. You should be borrowing the main ideas, because in all the paragraphs, a paragraph is equal to one main idea, and we have discussed it in the previous lecture. but those ideas, you should be borrowing those ideas. You shouldn't be just listing and repeating those subtopics or points which you have written. The main crux in your in your concluding paragraph should be the ideas which you have written throughout your essays. Okay, but you should once again I'm repeating, you should never sound repetitive. Okay, now the concluding paragraph creates echoes of the introductory and body paragraphs to reinforce analysis ideas. Now, if the examiner has gone about reading 15 to 16 sheets of your examination paper, and in the end, once again, it would be beneficial for you that you reinforce your analysis and ideas in just 1 second concluding paragraph, one paragraph. Okay, so that would once again lead the examiner to believe that you have clarity of thought. Okay, so it should echo, your concluding paragraph should echo the introduction and body paragraphs. It should be resounding the ideas you have discussed in intro and body. The concluding paragraph should never ever introduce something new which hasn't been discussed or elaborated throughout the essay, either in intro or in body paragraphs. Okay, so it should only be based on the main body of your essay. It should never ever discuss something new. Excuse me. So techniques for writing an impressive conclusion. Now in the previous slide I discussed that the your concluding paragraph is basically an a pyramid shaped, okay, triangle shape. It starts off narrowly with the thesis statement and it broadens into broad implications. Now, once again, those implications should be based on your essay. Now, there are four ways to end a conclusion or to make it an impressive conclusion. That would create a lasting impact on your examiner. Okay, and he would give you 40 marks. Okay, for that, you can either make a prediction in your concluding paragraph, like you can say that yes, democracy is no more vulnerable in Pakistan because of factors like a strong judiciary and independent media and actively vocal civil society. So you are making a prediction essentially in your essay. Okay, a broader implication, that is what we call, you are making a prediction, but that prediction, or let's suppose in any other case or in any other topic, that prediction must be substantiated by the material you have written in your essay. You can't make you must never make a prediction based on something which you have not mentioned in your essay. You can't make more broader predictions without having being provided something about those predictions which you have written in your essay. I mean, if you haven't written something or you haven't justified your stance in your paragraphs and you are making a prediction out of thin air, then the examiner won't believe you and he won't pass you, believe me. He would only recognize that your predictions have some weight to them if you have provided sound justifications throughout your essay. Okay, the second technique is you can suggest results or consequences. Okay, let's suppose the topic was women empowerment is essential for a country's development. I'm just making it up. So how can you end this topic? How can you write the concluding sentence? This is the second approach. You can suggest results or consequences. So we can say that if women are not empowered, which basically can constitute 51% of our workforce, these are the potential workforce. So if they are not employed in your in a, they are sitting at homes doing nothing, so to speak, they are not contributing in the economy, then our economy won't be as functional as it ought to be, because the women constitute 51% of our population. So this is just one aspect of this particular topic essay, that in which we can end our essay, that we can give some consequences, that if we don't empower women, then we won't develop on a sound footing, because half of our working population or potential workforce is sitting idle. So this is a consequence of not empowering the women. So this is one way of concluding. The first was to make a prediction, and the second was to suggest results or consequences. Then the third approach to writing a concluding paragraph is to suggest a solution, make a recommendation, or call for action. Now this technique is used for typical essays like causes, effects, solutions. For those sort of essays, you can end your conclusion, or you can write your concluding paragraph using this approach. For example, if the topic is about corruption or bad governance, let's suppose, you can end that, if corruption is not dealt with iron hand or on a war footing, then we won't be able to develop in the committee of nations, because if corruption is there, but remember once again, whatever the recommendations you are making, you should have already justified those in your essay, in the body of your essay. And remember one more thing, this is very important. When students are making recommendations, I have seen many write-ups, they are just writing a wish list. Okay, your recommendations should never be a wish list. Like uh, you know in one write-up, when I was checking that is democracy no more vulnerable in Pakistan, one student make a recommendation that we should go for presidential form of government in order to make democracy strengthened. Okay, so I mean, this is just a wish list. Okay, it's not a recommendation. And believe me, even if you were to switch to presidential form of government, what is the authority or the final authority that the things are going to change? And once again, even if they were going to change, why do we have to switch it? Because we have examples throughout the country of presidential forms of government, you know performing very well, actually. Like, you can take the example of US, for example. They don't have parliamentary form of government, they have presidential form of government, but they have fared very well, they are superpower. So your recommendations shouldn't be like a childish in nature, so to speak, or they shouldn't be a wish list. They should be mature recommendations, which can actually be applied in real life in Pakistan scenario, or whatever. If the topic is about general international issues, they should be practical in nature. You should be giving reasons that, or you should be backing them up that these recommendations can actually be put in effect. So recommendations, once again, they never should be a wish list. Of course, we can think about anything to cure a problem, but either that is actually feasible, we should be keeping that in mind. Now, the last and the fourth method to writing a concluding paragraph is by quoting an authority on the subject. Okay, let's suppose, once again, I'm writing something about democracy. If the paper or the topic is about democracy from any aspect, he can ask you from any angle. We can end that with the quote of someone who is considered an established authority on that subject. For example, we can quote Thomas Jefferson, so to speak. His famous quote is that information is the currency of democracy. That democracy can't thrive, or it can't be effective, if people are not provided with adequate information. Okay, without transparency or people being educated, there can't be any effective democracy. So you can quote similarly other authorities on a particular subject. When it comes to education, you can quote Nelson Mandela, because his sole emphasis, or one of his emphasis, was about educating the Negroes. So you should be quoting an authority which is considered an expert on that particular area. Okay, so these are the four main techniques which you can use to write a concluding paragraph. You can either make a prediction, you can suggest consequences, you can make a recommend you can recommend a solution, or make a recommendation, or call for action, and you can quote an authority. Now, which method you should be using? Well, it will depend from topic to topic. Okay, now, if it's a typical traditional essay, you might use this. If it's an argumentative essay, you might use this or this. Or this can be used in any sort of essay. You can quote any authority in any sort of essay. But once again, a caveat, an important a note of caution. that only quote if that quotation is relevant to the topic, if it is hitting the topic, right at its head. Because students often cram a lot of quotes just to use in essay or anything, and in the exam day, when they are recalling many of the quotes, but they have a tendency to put the quote anywhere in the essay. Okay, they consider that they should be putting the quotes at least somewhere because they have memorized so many of them. Believe me, I also memorized a lot of quotes, but I didn't put any in my essay, and I made it. Okay, I still passed it in my first attempt. So it doesn't matter that you have to put a quote no matter what, but if only put a quote if it is relevant to the topic. Okay, you should be memorizing quotes, but only if it is related to the topic. I will give you examples of how to end introductory, how to write paragraphs, by using each of these approach. So making a prediction. Let's suppose the topic is about college debt crisis. Okay, in Pakistan also this is a very important challenge. A lot of the students are taking loans. Okay, when it comes to higher education, because they can't simply afford it. So college debt crisis or crisis of higher education, so to speak, we are using the concluding paragraph by making a prediction. Okay, now this is a relatively small concluding paragraph. Yours should be a bit longer than this, but I'm using this shorter version, to make a to clarify the concepts actually. So in this approach, I am using the first in this concluding paragraph. I am using the first approach, that is to make a prediction. So let's read the concluding paragraph. We have seen how the costs of Here, we have seen how the costs of attending college have been rising. At the same time, sources of financial aid for students have been disappearing. Okay, if this trend continues, now this is a prediction. The wording, I said that your concluding paragraph should signal to the examiner that your essay is coming to an end. Now, it signals by using these signals to the examiner that your essay is coming to an end. If you use these sort of terminology, you can use any other sort. This is just an example. If this trend continues, fewer and fewer families will be able to send their children through 4 years of college. So this is a prediction that if we if we don't start providing aid to students for higher education, this would be this is the prediction we are making, that fewer and fewer students will be able to attend college. Now, once again, important. I hope, I believe that you have seen how the costs of attending college have been rising. Now, this means that we have already discussed it in our essay. We are not, making this prediction out of thin air or on the basis of something which we haven't discussed in our essay. Okay, we have already discussed these things. That is, cost of attending college has been rising. Sources of financial aid for students have been disappearing. We have already discussed these factors at length in our essay, and this gives us a clue that we have discussed this. Okay, on the basis of that, we're making a prediction. Okay, so this was the first approach to writing a concluding paragraph. The second approach which we discussed was that we suggest a result or consequences. Okay, now once again, to sum up, this is once again signaling to the examiner that this is our concluding paragraph. To sum up, the costs of attending college are up and financial aid for students is down. Fewer and fewer future members of the workforce are able to educate themselves beyond high school. As a result, now this means that we're going to suggest a consequence, that if we don't do this in a timely manner, this will happen. Okay, this will be the consequence. What will be the consequence? As a result, the nation will waste the intelligence, imagination, and energy of a large segment of the present college age generation. So in this approach, In this concluding paragraph, remember the topic is same. Okay, just in order to make sure that you're following the points, the techniques. So in this concluding paragraph, sample concluding paragraph, I have suggested a consequence that if we don't do this, this will happen. Okay, a large segment of our college age generation will miss out on higher education, and we will be wasting their intelligence, imagination, and energies. Okay, so this was the second approach. And moving on to the third approach we can use to conclude a paragraph is to make a solution, suggest a solution, make a recommendation, or call for action. So it is clear, once again, suggesting that this is the concluding paragraph. It is clear that the system of higher education is in trouble. For many students, 4 years of college is no longer possible because of increasing costs and decreasing financial aid. To reverse this trend, now just 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 see this, the line and the phrase highlighted, underlined, or in bold. To reverse this trend, now this signals that we are going to recommend or suggest a solution or going to make a recommendation. So to reverse this trend, we must demand that the government increase its financial support of colleges and universities and restore financial aid program. Our future depends on it. Okay, so now we have made a recommendation, we have suggested a solution, or we have called for action. Okay, we are telling that the government should do something about it. So this was the third way to write an effective concluding paragraph. Okay, moving on. And the last technique to write a concluding paragraph, and it was, so the last technique which we were going to talk about was how you can quote some authority on the subject. Okay, again, same topic, the concluding paragraph. In conclusion, cost of education is rising and financial aid is declining, with the result that many can no longer afford to go to college. If our nation is to prosper, increased government funding for education is essential, even if it requires higher taxes. Okay, as Malcolm X said, education is the passport to the future, for tomorrow belongs to those who prepare for it today. Okay, hence, it is evident that a nation's economic wealth will increase through an educated public. It is therefore in our self interest to pay the taxes for public education. So, here we have used the fourth approach. We have quoted an authority on the subject. We have quoted Malcolm X, who was an advocate for the rights of black people. Okay, and his sole emphasis was to educate the black people so that they can come at par with the white folks. Okay, so we have quoted an authority. Okay, someone who is recognized for his efforts on something. Okay, now let's suppose if you're talking about education, you can talk about someone who is an authority, or you can talk about, let's suppose, Malala Yousafzai. You know, there are various quotes which are on the internet which you can use. When it comes to media and the freedom of media, you can quote Noam Chomsky. He's an authority on such subjects. And just to, I'm just giving you an examples, but you should be quoting an authority. Number one, if you are using the fourth approach, you should be adhering to criteria. Number one, the the person you are quoting should be an authority on that subject. Okay, he should be an authority on that subject. And number two, the quote should be relevant. Now see, this quote is relevant. The Malcolm X said that we have to prepare for it today, we have to do something today to make sure that our future is bright. Okay, and what we have to do today, we have to spend on education, because this is our passport to the future. So this quote is directly hitting the topic. Okay, the topic of education. We have to do something about education, we have to prepare for it today. So your quote should be directly hitting the topic. So these were the four techniques which you can use to conclude your paragraph. Number one was to make a prediction. Number two was to suggest to predict some consequences, to suggest, to give the consequences that if we don't do this, this will happen. Number three was to give a recommendation. And about recommendations, I told you that they shouldn't be a wish list. And last technique was to use or to quote an authority. Now, this is a checklist which you should consider while writing the concluding paragraph, and it is very important. It is very very important. Follow each of these points with me with full attention. Don't introduce new points or go off in new directions in the concluding paragraph. Okay, this is very very important. You should never be introducing new points in your conclusion. Remember, the word conclusion itself suggests that you are concluding, you are summarizing your whole essay in one paragraph, and in one paragraph you can't afford to introduce new topic areas. Okay. Number two, you should never introduce new ideas. Number two, your conclusion should not introduce new points for discussion. It should reinforce the points you have already made in your essay. Okay, it should only be used for reinforcing your points or the points you have already made. Avoid simply repeating the thesis statement or listing the main points. Once again, I just discussed it in very very detail that you can't simply repeat, because examiner is reading your paper in a rhythm, and whenever he comes across a sentence and he gets a sniff that it's a repetition, it would leave a bad taste on the part of examiner. So never repeat, always paraphrase. Don't conclude more than you can reasonably can from the evidence you have presented. So always conclude based on the evidence which you have presented in your whole essay. You can't conclude something which you haven't basically given evidence about, or you haven't backed up in your whole essay. Always conclude within the bounds of your essay. Always conclude on the basis of the material or the support which you have provided in your essay. You can't conclude some broader implication, okay, which doesn't relate to the points you have made in your essay, because that would once again make you look like being very far-fetched. Okay, someone who is making castles in the air, who doesn't know the ground realities, who is just writing anything that comes to his mind, who is not mature enough. So you have to reflect maturity in your CSS essay exam. So always conclude on the basis of the evidence you have presented in your essay. Avoid first person point of view. Okay, never use personal pronouns like I, you, we. Now in the previous examples I have used we, but that was just to make the concepts clear. In the real essay, you can't use we, the word we, I, you. Okay, first person pronouns should be avoided, or any pronouns, so to speak, he, she. Okay, first person pronouns or any other pronouns should be avoided, because essay is a very formal piece of writing. Remember, never use I. It is a tendency for students to use I in the concluding paragraph. Okay, they say that I believe that this is going to. You don't have to do this. The examiner knows that this is your version of the story, this is your opinion, this is coming from you. So why use I and spoil your introduct or in your essay? The examiner already knows that this is your piece of writing. So don't use pronouns. Avoid slangs. Okay, of course, essay is a formal piece of writing. You can't use slangs. Echo the language and ideas from your introduction and body paragraphs. I discussed this earlier on. And avoid any attempts at humor, cuteness, or sarcasm. Okay, because once again, essay is a formal piece of writing. An examiner is judging you on some criterias which I have discussed, and which I will be discussing once again. So that is it for today. If you have any questions, you can post them in the comments box below. I hope you have learned a lot, that how we can write excuse me, how we can write an effective concluding paragraph, an eye-catching concluding paragraph. I will also be sharing some sample concluding paragraph from past papers, as I have promised that I will be sharing some outlines and introductory paragraphs from past papers, so that you know how to write, in a beautiful manner, in an eye-catching manner, so that the examiner, puts you in the 5% of the lot who make it, and get 40 marks or more. So I will be sharing sample introductory paragraphs, concluding paragraphs, and the outlines. Okay, but you have to try it yourselves also. You have to use the techniques which I have taught you about outline, about writing an introductory paragraph. You have to try it yourselves. Don't just rely or wait for my sample write-ups. Okay, don't wait for them. Don't wait for them, or don't rely on those, because ultimately it is you who are going to reproduce something at the exam day. So I hope you have learned a lot from today's lecture. I'll meet you in the next lecture. Until then, best of luck.